This is Deceleration, deceleration.news. We're talking about nuclear power, Nazi terror, domestic terrorism, and security of the electrical grid. Thanks for joining us.
So after 9/11, things ratcheted up, not to the extent we think they needed to, but now they're finding all sorts of ways to pare back on those security requirements, and we're on the verge of some decisions that the NRC may make, which could significantly impair the ability of plants to withstand attack, which is foolish given, again, this domestic threat.
That is Edwin Lyman of the Union of Concerned Scientists speaking with Deceleration this week. And he is the Director of Nuclear Power Safety at the UCS, the former president of the Nuclear Control Institute, and member of the Institute of Nuclear Materials Management. Now, this is all kind of familiar territory for us from, a decade ago and more, back kind of on the tailwind when San Antonio was trying to expand our holdings on the coast, the South Texas Project nuclear complex, that we had to sue our way out of that project, expansion project, when anticipated costs ballooned over a very short period from about $8 billion to $18 billion. We lost hundreds of millions of dollars in the process. And while I was back when I was working at the San Antonio Current and then later doing some freelance work, and thinking a lot about nuclear safety, and this plant on the coast exposed to the Gulf is one that at the time there was a report that came out, a press materials that came out from UT non-proliferation program that kind of highlighted those insecurities. And so visiting this week, a very different kind of backdrop, and this is, the rise of domestic terrorism, neo-Nazi terrorism, ongoing and escalating targeting of power infrastructure and electrical infrastructure in the United States. As we list out on our story at deceleration.news, these targeted attacks seem to be accelerating across the country. There's multiple cases from 2022 that are highlighted there. We looked at DOE, Department of Energy data for Texas, and the overall numbers for what they link to, or what they link, are cyber events plus vandalism plus suspicious activity plus physical attacks on electrical infrastructure. And we looked in the state of Texas, and they just like skyrocket 2021 and 22. And we have been calling individual law enforcement agencies. The DOE has not responded to our inquiry, and we've been able to link a couple of incidents that seem to gel with what the DOE is listening. But this is not all. I want to say, of these 20 some incidents, right, from 2022, they're not all attacks, right, and those are the ones that we're trying to figure out what is actually happening. But there's certainly folks from Texas who have gone to other states, who in one case they were had a plot supposedly was foiled, in which these folks were practicing weapons together. They were wearing suicide necklaces, one of fentanyl, and one of these swallowed theirs when they were taken into custody, and recruiting across the state of Texas. So this is not going in reverse. It's going forward, and it's something that for San Antonio and for broader San Antonio folks who rely on power from CPS Energy or our partners at SDP, it's something to really pay attention to. At least here in San Antonio, right, moving forward, we're getting off of coal power, and then in a few years expanding our gas footprint, it looks like. And the nuclear footprint doesn't change. We're currently, I think, overall capacity is about 13% of the entire energy mix, and yet the generation that we're bringing in from that plant, it's 25% or more of what we're using our electricity every year for people in the city of San Antonio, and I'm sure there's others that are in that same ballpark. So I this issue of security is one we're going to have to be really looking at. And so, without further ado, here's Dr. Lyman.
I think people should be paying more attention than they are to the nuclear safety and security issues.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, um, because we're talking about the uh, worst consequences are from events that are hard to uh, they're either very remote possibilities or hard to assess the possibility. For example, a terrorist attack.
Mm-hmm.
People simply don't pay attention unless there's something screaming at them as an emergency. So, uh, we've seen people's concern about nuclear power in this country just wax and wane over time. As accidents like Chernobyl and Fukushima have occurred, but people tend to forget because there's no real news, and they become complacent. And then there's also this headwind of this massive PR campaign to kind of rebrand nuclear as clean, safe energy,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which is the industry is overreaction to trying to win over public hearts and minds to support nuclear power expansion,
Mm-hmm.
and that is having some effect in that they've managed to sort of characterize people who are worried about nuclear safety as uh, um, just nervous Nellies or
Mm-hmm.
people who don't understand the new technologies, people who are Luddites, people who are worried about the wrong things. And I think it's misguided. You have to understand where it's coming from. It's really spearheaded by the nuclear industry and its supporters, but it's managed to change a lot of hearts and minds. And I think that's distorting the policy landscape and also the ability to have an intelligent discussion about these issues. So I am concerned
Mm-hmm.
about this complacency.
What about how would you describe the gap between what kind of actually occurred in terms of ecological and human health, both, with Chernobyl and Fukushima? Um, I, I mean, it's been a while, like I mentioned in an email for me since I've been looking at this, but I at the time, at both those times, I did probably more than my share in terms of the average American research into what actually occurred, the mortalities and illnesses and ecological harm. How would you quantify the distance between those two things?
Well, the problem is that the effects of radiation, especially at low levels,
Mm-hmm.
um, are hard to detect.
Right.
So people, the industry will point to, that only, I don't know what they say, 25 or 30 people died because of Chernobyl and no one died because of Fukushima. So somehow that means it's all okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the the insidious thing is that exposure to low level radiation is not going to lead to any kind of immediate or visible health effects, but
Mm-hmm.
can cause cancer over time. And um, because it would take pretty significant doses to a lot of people to actually lead to detectable excess cancer rates. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, background cancer rates are very high, in human beings. So it takes a huge uh, insult to really be able to see signals. You have to do studies very, very carefully if you want to look for those kinds of signals. And in most cases, we know that people are being exposed, were exposed, and continue to be exposed from radiation that was released during those accidents. But in most cases, those cancers will not be detectable in an epidemiological sense, but it doesn't mean they're not there.
Mhm.
So, so it's kind of deceptive to pretend that there is no effect from that exposure. For instance, at Chernobyl, there is one type of cancer that, because it's so rare, and the exposures were so high, that there's little doubt that it was the excesses were caused by exposure to radioactive iodine, and that's thyroid cancer in children,
Mhm.
where a couple of 10 to 20,000 excess cancers among children at the time of the accident. But most other forms of cancer aren't going to be that obvious. So, but based on forward projections, in other words, knowing something about how much radiation was released, what kind it is, and where it's dispersed, you can make estimates that are probably tens of thousands of cancers that will be caused by Chernobyl, and probably thousands as a result of Fukushima. But again, you can't. There's no label on
Mhm.
those diseases to say this is what caused it.
Mhm.
Um, so that's part of the issue. So the industry and supporters trying to gaslight people and saying that these are totally benign technologies when they're not, and it doesn't mean you can't use nuclear power. It just means you need to respect its risks. And unfortunately, if people are uh, lulled into complacency, there's little support for the measures that are needed to make sure those risks are minimized.
Yeah, let me ask you kind of on risk, on just on what we know about, when things are functioning, by according to whatever regulatory, frameworks exist as they are today. I know you noticed you had a Hatch 2 reference in Georgia on your Twitter feed earlier today, and I mean, without, barring, I mean, I reached out to you, to kind of pursue this conversation about kind of worst case and
Right,
terror attacks and
right,
Nazis in the US.
right.
Um, but barring all of that, um, there are issues that occur, and I'm wondering if you could maybe highlight a couple of those so people understand um, what we're working with under the current regulatory environment and the way
Yeah,
these older plants are operating.
yeah. I mean, the nuts and bolts of nuclear safety are literally, that they're valves that need to
Mhm.
open or shut when you need them to,
Mhm.
and that takes some level of maintenance and repair and testing to make sure that those all function. And if you are negligent, if the company's trying to save money and they cut back on those things, then those valves may not work when they're needed. So it's really, again, it points to what would happen in if you do have a more severe kind of upset
Mhm.
that could potentially evolve into a serious accident. You need to have all those safety systems in working order, and that means being able to close and open those valves. And
Mhm.
so the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to its credit, is doing a series of inspections to focus on these things like valves, because they were finding that there was, um, across the industry, probably as a result of cutting back on maintenance to save money, uh, that there were higher levels of valve failures or uh, um, valve unavailability,
Mhm.
and that cumulatively could add up to a serious problem if, in the case when you need to rely on that and it's not working, um, you could have a problem. And another aspect is just the human capital, the environment in which workers carry out their duties, both safety and security. And there are some pervasive um, issues of safety and security culture uh, at various plants where workers are intimidated. They're afraid to come forward with their concerns, and they feel disrespected. Their working conditions aren't good. And those, of course, like any other industry, those can add up to serious problems because you require a high level of performance to make sure that nuclear plants run safely. So
I have I just turning around. I at some point in my life, I picked up somebody's, let's see if I can look here. There was a doctoral dissertation of someone up at Texas Tech,
mm,
and it was called, titled The Lone Star and the Atom.
mm,
And it detailed, it was pretty, for me, I don't know if it didn't fit into the kind of how I was writing or what I was writing about, but it was about labor. A lot of it was about labor and
yes.
building these power plants, and just how atrocious both workers were treated, and these contracts, the corner cutting, and it was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I get the point.
Yeah. So related to kind of like the topic that, when I reached out to you, I have been calling a lot of the Texas local police and
Mm,
county sheriffs, and trying to check DOE data. I haven't found anything yet. I mean, I don't know when the DOE marks something a suspicious activity, or and they put it on a chart in terms of grid security.
mhm,
That may not involve local law enforcement. I don't know, but so that's kind of what I was looking at, and I stumbled across one of the Nazis in Ohio that are under federal indictment in Ohio. I think an Ohio case is from Katy, Texas, and then one of these founders of probably the super decentralized and more radical groups in Florida had made reference to they had wanted to target a power plant in Florida.
right. It's the Boston division.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in relation then to, South Texas project, nuclear complex, I mean, this is one where, and I don't remember all the specifics, but I remember there was concerns about, one, its exposure, kind of like to, I guess it's hard to defend, I guess. And also like backup generators were not great. And all these reasons that the folks at the non-proliferation studies in UT had kind of like put STP on their short
Mhm,
list of vulnerable
mhm.
reactors. And I'm just wondering if you can maybe speak to kind of the kinds of things that they're looking at, or people look at with nuclear power plants in terms of their vulnerabilities.
Yes, well, it's important to understand that no matter how safe a nuclear plant be with regard to its normal operation and the kinds of accidents that might occur that are very infrequent, severe earthquakes, floods, or just a internal accident that could propagate, generally those risks are fairly low. Of course, it depends on how much for example, the flooding risks. But no matter how safe that plant looks with regard to those things, all bets are off when you're talking about a terrorist attack, because terrorists who know what they're doing could sabotage the multiple backup safety systems that are there, again, to protect against accidents. So, the risk of multiple simultaneous failures in diverse safety systems is low if it just happens at random. But if someone knows what they're doing, they can target all those at the same time. So you can't really put a number on how likely is, a terrorist attack to lead to a Chernobyl type accident. That's why you generally need to have strong security to prevent terrorists from accessing the vital areas of the plant. So the first vulnerability is, of course, the offsite power lines, and that's was targeted in the past, like by Earth First, I guess, right, in Arizona, and those are not protected, as we know. But nuclear power plants depend on those offsite power lines as their primary power source. So what you see at Zaporizhia in Ukraine is that when explosions were disabling their offsite power lines, they were forced to go and back up emergency diesel generators on site.
Right.
And you can't operate the reactor when all you're relying on is the diesel generators, and they are inherently, they have their own vulnerabilities and they need fuel, etc. So it's not, a safe condition to rely on, or to not have offsite power for too long. But you have to assume that in a terrorist attack, that's the first thing they would cut, and they would have no problem doing that. So then, as part of a organized terrorist attack, then the goal would be to destroy as much equipment on site as would be needed to render inoperable all the backup systems you would need if you lose offsite power, and that includes things like diesel generators or various types of cooling systems with pumps and the pipes that support those. So there are a whole lot of ways you can sabotage a nuclear plant, leading to a core melt within a matter of hours or less, if people know what they're doing. And depending on the details of the plant, it could take only the attacks in a couple of places to do that. So you really need to have security forces to keep those adversaries away from this equipment. And that's over time, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission strengthened its requirements for security, and now has what's called this design basis threat. So it's a postulated terrorist attack, and security forces are required to be able to interdict and to neutralize that attacker. And that's the responsibility of the plant owner under the present guideline or requirements, with a few exceptions. But the issues that UT outlined in that paper, and things that I've been studying for many decades, have to do with whether the assumptions about that threat are realistic, or are they lowballing threat, and are the measures that are taken in response to even the threat that they're required to meet, are they actually going to be good enough? And so it's not only having everything in place, but being able to test it is a critical part. So the NRC actually has a requirement, which was introduced after 9/11, partly due to the efforts of groups I work for, that requires, as a legal requirement, that they have to be inspected with force-on-force exercises, where the NRC inspectors will stage mock terrorist attacks and see how well the security force does. But the problem is that security costs money, and to maintain a full complement of security officers, 5 shifts a week, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of security officers, and that's an expense of $10 million or more a year.
What was that? You I got a little bit of interference. Yes. How much per year do you estimate?
Well, let's say there are 200 guards, and they're
for one plant.
Remember, you have to have multiple shifts.
Yeah, right.
And so let's say they earn 100,000 a year. So you're talking about 20 million a year. And that's just the human, just the salaries. There's all the maintaining the equipment and all the other auxiliary requirements. So it costs a lot of money, and the industry has always seen that as a good place to cut, because if you don't really believe that there's this threat out there, then why are we spending all this money to do that?
Right.
And that is and so their game has been for decades to try to lessen that those security burdens and the associated cost. And they've been having some success in the last 10 years or so. So after 9/11, things ratcheted up, not to the extent we think they needed to, but now they're they're finding all sorts of ways to pare back on those security requirements, and we're on the verge of some decisions that the NRC may make, which could significantly impair the ability of plants to withstand attack, which is foolish given, again, this domestic threat that may be increasing.
Can you tell me what that vote is, or when that may be coming?
Yeah, well, this is a proposal to give more credit to local law enforcement response,
Okay.
and therefore allow on-site security forces to be less, to have less responsibility, and therefore the owners have less responsibility. And this is something that other countries do. Some countries, they have minimal, on-site security. Their main goal of the on-site security is to, if they detect something, they call the local cavalry, and they're supposed to show up and do the dirty work. But the U.S., because of this legal requirement that the owner has to defend the plant without taking credit for local law enforcement, so that's led to this requirement for having these armed responders on 24/7. But the industry has been pushing to go in the direction of other countries where you reduce the on-site security and give off-site law enforcement more of a role, and that's problematic in a lot of ways. The obvious thing is that local law enforcement they don't work for the utility. They have other responsibilities, and they may not have the funding or even the training, the equipment to necessarily respond to what could happen. And that is compounded now by the potential that local law enforcement might be in on the conspiracy. And also, certainly in Texas, I probably don't even have to mention the Uvalde massacre. But that just shows that your local law enforcement, unless they are trained and equipped and have the right plans in place and can respond promptly and know what to do and coordinate with on-site and everything else, if all that is not there, then this response could be, they couldn't even protect these poor children against this one teenager. So, the idea that we're going to give local law enforcement more responsibility without giving them the resources or any of that is just downright dangerous. And for the life of me, I can't understand why the NRC is even entertaining this proposal, but there's currently a voting paper in front of the 5 commissioners. The vote is not in yet, but that could essentially authorize going in this direction of giving local law enforcement these additional responsibilities.
Given the procedural aspects of this, it sounds like, is there still a window for public sentiment to be, effective in this vote? It sounds like the vote's been called, the paperwork, as you say, is out.
Yeah, the only thing, public's free to contact the commissioners and tell them what they think.
Yeah.
But there's no formal role for the public in that. If a federal agency can always be sued for an arbitrary and capricious decision, maybe that's becoming easier now with the current Supreme Court than it used to be. But it's still a huge lift to sue a federal agency. Maybe EPA is, it's pretty common, but it's not. It's very hard to do with the NRC, partly because judges simply don't feel like they have, the knowledge to second guess this regulatory agency with all the specialized, training and subject matter experts, et cetera. But this wouldn't require. Well, it's not clear if it would require a change to the rules or not.
Mhm.
And if I think if they determine it does, then there would be more opportunity for public input because through the rulemaking process.
Mhm.
But just a vote that doesn't entail a new rule, that's a policy matter by the commission. It's very hard for the public to influence that.
There's a lot of money in federal, interest in the Inflation Reduction Act, and there's, as you said, the lobbying is pretty strong, and I've had people approaching me that are asking questions about nuclear that haven't been there for. I've been in San Antonio since 2007, and I didn't see a lot of boosters around, right? And there they are. So is there a place for this, and under what conditions and circumstances for kind of like a new generation?
Well, there may be a place for it, but you can't cut corners on safety and security.
Yeah.
And um, we don't see it as nuclear power is inevitable and essential, and no matter what the risks are, we just have to make it fit. We think it has to meet some bottom line standards for it to be an acceptable solution, and it's just not clear yet whether the economics is going to be there. Even with all the subsidies that are being lavished on it right now,
Right.
that it will be competitive with low carbon resources that don't carry these safety and security risks. So
Right.
you got to take the risk seriously and not just try to gaslight the public into thinking that it's completely harmless.
Mhm.
And go forward with trying to make it as cheap as possible. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, whatever the risks, that's not the right approach. And so I feel like the way the industry and their cheerleaders are carrying on now, they're going to make it harder for nuclear power to be deployed safely because they aren't.
Mhm.
They think the public and the public image is the problem and not their own. They're not taking care of their own house. You know,
Mhm.
so
Yeah, and I would say even domestically, I mean, we people are used to thinking about and talking about, if any, if at all, Fukushima and Chernobyl, but we certainly have a history of near misses and some releases in the U.S. that folks maybe aren't quite as
sure.
familiar with, and the issue of waste seems to still be kind of a forever storage, and dilution, I guess, are the two options.
Well, I mean, the only viable option, for long-term disposal of spent fuel is a deep geological repository, and there's no program right now to
Right.
even find one. So, so that can is they're kicking it down the road even further, and again, trying to paper over that issue by pretending that there's going to be some new exciting technology that'll be able to make the nuclear waste problem go away. And that's
Mhm.
another, misleading, potentially dangerous direction, which again is just distracting from trying to solve the problem in a meaningful way that would really enable nuclear power to thrive. They're looking for silver bullets that aren't there, and that's just going to cause us to go down rabbit holes and potentially pursue very dangerous options like reprocessing spent fuel, which
Mhm.
has serious proliferation risks because it produces separated plutonium. And then, of course, you have you're not that close to Abilene, I guess, but they're the Abilene Christian University wants to build this research molten salt
Saw
nuclear
that.
reactor. Didn't you? Yeah.
What? So yeah, can you tell? Can you speak to that? Because I got like
Uh,
I saw the NRC. I get press releases and things like that on inspections,
right.
but I just don't know enough to
Right. Right.
how significant is this, and what is this technology?
Well,
That sort of thing.
yeah. Well, it's not. It's a type of nuclear reactor that I for the life of me, I can't understand why anyone's interested in it.
Wow.
Because instead of having solid fuel with a cladding around it, so that you do have additional layers of protection against release of radiation. This would use a liquid fuel where the fission products are constantly bubbling up and being released. And so they have to be captured and filtered, but you can't capture everything. So I don't know if that campus, if the student body there really understands what they're in for, if this thing even goes forward. And I think it's being funded by some wealthy individual who may lose interest if they run into problems, which I'm sure they will.
So,
and I highlighted there was an NRC letter recently where they said they had to consult with the Department of Homeland Security on the vulnerabilities of that site with regard to terrorist attack.
Yeah, I'll look for that letter also. And thanks for bringing that up, because I did get that email and it has not been on top of my mind. We're not that close, but we're not that far either. And and certainly it's just a matter of
Where is that? Is that west of Dallas? Where is it?
Yeah, it's west. It's northwest. It's almost getting into the Panhandle, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah. So it sounds like these are emissions that can't be captured, that just are in the campus environment. Is that what you're saying?
Well, this reactor will be bubbling. We'll get fission product gases like xenon and krypton, radioactive, and they're going to bubble out of the fuel. And so it has to have this elaborate system for capturing and storing and processing those gases, which is, it's an engineering challenge in itself, and not even clear how effective it would be. So, certainly if the amount of money they have. So I think this reactor in a number of ways is a real threat to that campus.
You said it is a real threat to that campus?
Yes.
Thank you for tuning in again to Deceleration's podcast. Check us out, deceleration.news. Support us at Patreon, or hey, check out our calendar, the Happening calendar. And we'll see you next time.